The crack of the gavel felt like a physical blow, but Elara Vance didn't flinch. In the sterile, merciless theater of the Manhattan family court, she was the lead actress in a tragedy, and her only line was silence. Her ex-husband, the charismatic private equity shark, Julian Croft, smirked as the judge read the verdict, stripping her of everything. The whispers in the gallery painted her as a fool, a woman so broken she couldn't even speak for herself. But what they saw as weakness was a calculated, devastating strategy. They didn't know her silence was a shield protecting a secret so monumental, it was about to shatter the world of everyone who had wronged her. Because 5 days later, a single press release would turn those whispers into stunned gasps. The silent, defeated ex-wife was about to be introduced to the world by a different name, the sole heiress to the billion-dollar Blackwood fortune. This is the story of how a woman's quietest moment became her loudest victory. The courtroom was a symphony of quiet cruelties. The squeak of a lawyer's leather shoe on the polished floor, the rustle of papers that detailed the dismemberment of a life, the almost inaudible sigh from the judge. For Elara Vance, however, the loudest sound was the confident, rhythmic tap of her ex-husband's Mont Blanc pen against his pristine legal pad. Tap, 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 a metronome counting down the final seconds of her old life. Julian Croft sat across from her, a portrait of effortless victory. His suit, a custom Tom Ford creation, probably cost more than the alimony he was so vehemently fighting against. Beside him, his lawyer, Marcus Thorne, a man with a predator's smile, shuffled his documents with the smug air of a chess master who had his opponent in checkmate in 3 moves. "Ms. Vance," Judge Albright said, her voice edged with a weary impatience that had been building all morning. "The court has asked you a direct question. Mr. Croft's counsel has presented evidence suggesting you willfully mismanaged marital assets, leading to the failure of your art gallery. Do you have any response to these allegations?" Elara looked up. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sea, met the judge's for a fleeting moment. She saw not malice but frustration. Here was a woman who just wanted to clear her docket to move on to the next broken family. Elara's gaze then drifted to Julian. He leaned forward slightly, a glint of anticipation in his eyes. He wanted her to fight. He wanted her to cry, to scream, to deny it all with the frantic, messy passion he had always despised in her. He wanted a show. She gave him nothing. Her own lawyer, a kind but overwhelmed public defender named David Brown, nudged her gently under the table. "Elara, please," he whispered, his voice a strained plea. "Say something. Anything. Tell them about the accounts he locked you out of. Tell them how he diverted the funds." Elara's hands remained perfectly still in her lap. She had given David the full story, but with one critical instruction: he was to present the facts clinically, but she would not testify. She would not be cross-examined. She would not engage. David thought it was a strategy born of trauma, a psychological retreat. He couldn't have been more wrong. It was the most aggressive, calculated move of her life. Marcus Thorne rose to his feet, his voice booming with practiced theatricality. "Your Honor, the defendant's silence speaks volumes. It is the silence of culpability. For 2 years, my client, Mr. Croft, poured his hard-earned money into what he believed was his wife's dream. A dream that turned into a financial nightmare due to her, let's call it, artistic temperament when it came to finances. He is not asking for retribution. He is simply asking for a clean break, and for the court to recognize that he should not be penalized further by paying alimony to the very person responsible for such significant financial loss." It was a masterful twisting of the truth. The gallery had been Julian's idea, a vanity project for his arty wife that he could show off to his friends. He'd underfunded it from the start, and then when he'd met his younger, more malleable new girlfriend Tiffany, he'd systematically siphoned money from the gallery's business accounts into his own private holdings, starving it of cash flow and creating the very failure he was now pinning on Elara. He hadn't just broken her heart. He had tried to break her spirit, to rewrite history so that she was not just the discarded wife, but the incompetent one. "Ms. Vance," the judge repeated, her tone hardening, "this is your final opportunity to address the court regarding the claim for alimony and the division of remaining assets. Your silence will be taken as acquiescence." Elara felt the weight of every eye in the room. The pitying stares from strangers, the triumphant sneer from Julian, the worried glance from David. This was the moment of her public humiliation. She had walked into this marriage with a promising career as a historical art curator and a small but significant inheritance from her grandmother. She was leaving with nothing but a suitcase of clothes and a mountain of debt Julian had cleverly engineered to be in her name. The court was about to formalize it. She took a slow, deliberate breath. She looked directly at Julian, holding his gaze. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. He was expecting tears, a tremor of the lip. He saw only a serene, unnerving stillness. She gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head to her lawyer. David Brown slumped in his chair, defeated. "My client has no statement, Your Honor." The gavel fell. In light of the evidence presented and the defendant's refusal to contest the claims, Judge Albright declared, "The court rules in favor of the plaintiff, Mr. Croft. The request for spousal support is denied. All outstanding business debts associated with the Vance Gallery are assigned to Ms. Vance. The marital apartment and its contents are awarded to Mr. Croft. This marriage is hereby dissolved." The sound echoed, finalizing her erasure. Julian Croft subtly pumped his fist under the table. Marcus Thorne clapped him on the shoulder. Elara stood up, her movements measured and calm. As she turned to walk out of the courtroom, she could hear Tiffany, who had been sitting in the back row, whisper excitedly to a friend, "He's free! It's finally over! We can go to Aspen next week!" Elara didn't look back. She walked past the rows of benches, her back straight, her head held high. She felt the sting of their judgment like 1,000 tiny needles, but beneath it a cold, hard certainty was beginning to form. They thought they had witnessed an ending. They had no idea they had just witnessed the beginning. She walked out into the hazy New York afternoon, a woman with nothing to her name. And for the first time in years she felt utterly, completely, and dangerously free. 2 years earlier, Elara had left Julian. It wasn't a dramatic plate-smashing affair. It was a quiet departure on a Tuesday morning while he was in a board meeting. She had packed a single bag, leaving behind the sprawling Soho loft that had become a gilded cage, its minimalist white walls a constant screaming reminder of the color that had been bleached from her own life. The first few months were a blur of temp jobs and cheap coffee. She worked as a barista, a dog walker, a freelance fact-checker for a dry academic journal. The humiliation was a constant companion, but it was sharper, more honest than the veiled condescension she had endured in her marriage. Julian had loved the idea of her, the brilliant, cultured art historian who looked good on his arm at fundraisers. He had systematically dismantled the reality of her, criticizing her research, mocking her passion projects, and slowly convincing her that her ambitions were childish fantasies. It was during this period, while working at a small, perpetually rain-streaked cafe in the West Village called The Daily Grind, that she met Alistair. He wasn't Alistair then. He was just Mr. Ash, an elderly man who came in every afternoon at precisely 300 p.m. He was tall and stooped, with a shock of untamed white hair and eyes that were a startlingly bright blue. He dressed in worn, comfortable corduroys and tweed jackets that smelled faintly of old books and Earl Grey tea. He always ordered the same thing: black coffee, 1 sugar, and a seat by the window where he would read thick, leather-bound books and stare out at the bustling street. Most of the staff ignored him, seeing him as just another piece of the cafe's furniture. But Elara, with her curator's eye for detail, noticed things. The quality of his worn leather shoes. The quiet authority with which he held himself even when lost in thought. The way he treated everyone, from the busboy to the manager, with the same level of gentle, unassuming respect. Their friendship began with a book. He was reading a first edition of Homer's Odyssey in the original Greek. "A difficult voyage home," Elara had said quietly as she refilled his coffee. He looked up, his bright eyes focusing on her for the first time. A slow smile spread across his face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Indeed," he replied, his voice a low, pleasant rumble. "But the monsters are often less fearsome than the memories one is sailing away from." From that day on they spoke. Their conversations were never about the mundane. They talked about the use of lapis lazuli in Renaissance paintings, the disputed authorship of Shakespeare's later plays, the quiet genius of Emily Dickinson, the fall of Constantinople. In Mr. Ashe, Elara found an intellectual peer, a mind as curious and as hungry as her own. He never asked about her past, about why a woman who could debate the merits of Caravaggio's chiaroscuro was wiping down sticky tables for a living. He simply accepted her as she was in that moment. He listened. When she spoke about art, the passion she thought Julian had extinguished would flare back to life. She described the feeling of standing before a Rothko, the sublime, terrifying pull of its colors. She talked about the secret history of objects, the stories embedded in a hand-carved chair or a piece of Roman glass. "You don't just see things, Elara," he told her one afternoon, his gaze thoughtful. "You understand their soul." It was a profound validation, a single sentence that began to heal cracks within her she thought were permanent. He shared pieces of himself too, but always in oblique, allegorical ways. He spoke of building a business empire as if it were a grand, intricate tapestry, full of brilliant threads and dark, ugly knots. He lamented the loneliness of the view from the top of a mountain, the way the air grew thin, and the world below became abstract and distant. He spoke of a family lost to ambition and time of regrets that had settled deep in his bones. One day, as a cold autumn rain lashed against the cafe window, he seemed particularly melancholic. "Tell me, Elara," he said, stirring his coffee, though it had no sugar to dissolve, "if you were given a great power and immense capacity to shape the world, what would you do with it?" Elara thought for a moment, wiping a stray drop of water from the table. "I don't think I'd try to shape the world," she answered honestly. "It's too big, too stubborn. I think I'd try to protect the small, beautiful things that the world tries to crush. A young artist's talent, a forgotten piece of history, a quiet place for people to think. I suppose I'd build a sanctuary, not an empire." Mr. Ashe looked at her for a long time, his blue eyes searching her face. Then he nodded slowly. "A sanctuary," he repeated softly. "Yes, I think you would." Not long after, Mr. Ashe stopped coming to the cafe. The 3:00 p.m. lull felt empty, the chair by the window achingly vacant. Elara inquired at nearby hospitals and community centers, but no one had heard of a Mr. Ashe. He had vanished as quietly as he had appeared, leaving her with a renewed sense of her own worth and a deep, puzzling sense of loss. She had no idea that their quiet intellectual friendship in a dingy cafe was the single most important relationship of her life. She didn't know that Mr. Ashe, the lonely old man with the kind eyes, was Alistair Blackwood, the legendary reclusive titan of industry, a man so private that there were fewer than a dozen known photographs of him in existence. And she certainly didn't know that in his final months battling a silent illness, he had found in her the one thing his billions could never buy, a genuine human connection, untainted by greed or expectation. He had been testing her, observing her, and she had passed a test she never even knew she was taking. The 5 days following the divorce were a descent into a gray, featureless limbo. Elara moved into a small 6th-floor walk-up apartment in a less-than-fashionable part of Brooklyn, the kind of place where the hiss of the radiator was the only constant companion. The court's judgment was a tangible weight, a legal declaration of her worthlessness. Julian had made sure of it. He'd texted her once the day after the verdict. "Hope you enjoy your new life. Don't come crawling back when you can't pay your bills. Jay." She deleted it without replying. She spent her days sending out resumes for any position related to art or history, no matter how menial. The replies were sparse and discouraging. The failure of her gallery, now a matter of public record thanks to the divorce proceedings, was a black mark against her name. In the art world, where reputation was everything, she was radioactive. On the fifth day, a crisp Friday morning, a letter arrived. It wasn't shoved in her mailbox with the usual junk mail and bills. It was delivered by a courier, a stern-looking man in a sharp uniform who required her signature. The envelope was thick, made of heavy cream-colored cardstock. The return address was embossed in elegant, severe lettering. Sterling and Finch, LLP, Sterling Tower, 57th Street, Manhattan. Elara's heart seized. Sterling and Finch. She knew the name. Everyone knew the name. They weren't just lawyers. They were kingmakers and dynasty builders, the firm that handled the estates of the world's wealthiest and most powerful families. She immediately assumed it was a mistake, or worse, that Julian, in some final act of cruelty, had sicked his own high-powered legal team on her for some imagined slight or outstanding debt he'd manufactured. With trembling hands, she slid open the envelope. The letter inside was brief and formal. Dear Ms. Vance, this letter is to request your presence at our offices on Monday, September 22nd at 10:00 a.m. The meeting concerns a matter of utmost importance regarding the estate of a recently deceased client. Your prompt attendance is essential. Please ask for Eleanor Sterling upon your arrival. Sincerely, Eleanor Sterling, Senior Partner, Sterling and Finch, LLP. The estate of a deceased client. She racked her brain trying to think of any distant relative or acquaintance who would be represented by such a firm. There was no one. The Vances were a modest family of academics. Her mother was gone, her father estranged. It had to be a mistake. She spent the weekend in a state of anxious confusion. She Googled Eleanor Sterling and found a picture of a formidable woman in her late 60s, with silver hair cut in a severe bob and an expression that suggested she did not suffer fools gladly. She was legendary in the world of estate law, known for her discretion and her iron will. On Monday morning, Elara stood before Sterling Tower, a gleaming black skyscraper that seemed to pierce the clouds. It was a monument to power and wealth a world away from her crumbling walk-up. Dressed in the only decent blazer she owned, she felt like an imposter. The lobby was a cavern of marble and polished steel populated by people who moved with an effortless, expensive confidence. Taking a deep breath, she approached the reception desk. "I'm here to see Eleanor Sterling," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "My name is Elara Vance." The receptionist, a cool blonde who looked more like a model than an office worker, checked her screen. Her perfectly plucked eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch. "Of course, Ms. Vance. Ms. Sterling is expecting you. 82nd floor." The elevator ride was a silent, stomach-churning ascent. When the doors opened, she stepped into a reception area that was more like a modern art museum. A massive Joan Mitchell painting hung on one wall, its vibrant chaos a stark contrast to the serene minimalist decor. A moment later, a door opened and Eleanor Sterling herself appeared. She was even more imposing in person. She wore a perfectly tailored gray suit, and her eyes, sharp and intelligent, seemed to assess Elara in a single sweeping glance. "Ms. Vance, thank you for coming," she said, her voice crisp and devoid of warmth. She didn't offer to shake hands. "Please come in." Elara followed her into a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking, godlike view of Central Park. The entire city sprawled beneath them. On the large mahogany desk, there was only a single thick, leather-bound document. "Please have a seat," Ms. Sterling said, gesturing to one of the two chairs facing her desk. "Can I offer you some water, coffee?" "Water would be fine, thank you," Elara managed to say, her throat dry. As an assistant silently brought in a glass of water, Ms. Sterling sat down and placed her hands on the document. She fixed her gaze on Elara, her expression unreadable. "Ms. Vance," she began, getting straight to the point. "I was the personal attorney for a man named Alistair Blackwood. I don't know if you are familiar with the name." Elara shook her head. "No, I don't believe so." The name was vaguely familiar, perhaps from a business journal Julian used to leave lying around, but it meant nothing to her personally. "Mr. Blackwood was an intensely private man," Ms. Sterling continued. He passed away 2 weeks ago after a long illness. He had no living relatives. For the last 40 years I have been the sole executor of his estate and his will." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the silent room. Elara felt a growing sense of surreal dislocation. What could this possibly have to do with her? Mr. Blackwood's will was unconventional, Ms. Sterling said, her tone clinical. "He spent the last year of his life finalizing its terms. It is my duty to inform you of its contents." She opened the leather-bound folder. The document is extensive, detailing the disposition of various assets, trusts, and philanthropic foundations. But the primary clause is quite simple. Eleanor Sterling looked up from the page, and for the first time a flicker of something curiosity-wonder crossed her stoic features. It reads, "To Elara Vance, a woman of kindness and integrity, who saw a man and not a fortune, I hereby bequeath my entire remaining estate without condition or qualification. She was a sanctuary in my final days, and it is my wish that she now has the means to build her own." The room tilted. Elara gripped the arms of her chair to steady herself. Her mind was a whirlwind of confusion. Elara Vance. Entire estate sanctuary. It made no sense. There must be a mistake," she stammered. "I don't know anyone named Alistair Blackwood." Ms. Sterling reached into a drawer and pulled out a simple framed photograph. She slid it across the desk. Elara looked down, and all the air left her lungs. It was him. Younger, yes, with dark hair and a confident smile, standing on the deck of a sailboat. But the eyes were unmistakable. The bright, intelligent, piercingly blue eyes. It was Mr. Ashe. The silence in the office was absolute, broken only by the frantic pounding of Elara's own heart. She stared at the photograph, her mind struggling to connect the two identities, the kind, unassuming Mr. Ashe from the cafe, and the mysterious, powerful Alistair Blackwood, whose name was now irrevocably linked to hers. "Mr. Ashe," she whispered the name, feeling foreign and inadequate on her tongue. A pseudonym he adopted in his later years. Eleanor Sterling confirmed, her voice softening almost imperceptibly. He grew weary of the sycophants and fortune hunters. He wanted to spend his final months experiencing the world without the distorting filter of his wealth. He found your cafe. He found you. Elara felt a wave of dizziness. Every conversation, every debate about art and philosophy replayed in her mind, now cast in a blinding new light. His talk of empires and lonely mountains, his question about what she would do with great power. It hadn't been idle chatter. It had been an interview, a final profound test. His entire estate. She asked, the words feeling absurd. What does that even mean? Ms. Sterling took a deep breath, as if preparing to launch a ship. It means, Ms. Vance, that as of the legal certification of his death last week, you are one of the wealthiest individuals in the world. The Blackwood estate is a diversified portfolio of assets valued after all taxes and obligations at approximately $9.7 billion. The number was so vast, so astronomical, that it didn't register as a real sum of money. It was a concept, an abstraction. Billion. With a B. It includes... Ms. Sterling continued, turning a page in the will. A controlling interest in Blackwood, consolidated a global logistics and technology firm, a real estate portfolio that includes this building, a 10,000-acre estate in upstate New York, a villa on Lake Como, a townhouse in Belgravia, London, and a private island in the Caribbean, a private art collection considered to be one of the finest in the world, with works by Monet de Kooning and a previously unknown Vermeer, and a liquid capital fund of over $2 billion. Elara felt like she was drowning. She shook her head, trying to clear it. But why me? We just talked. We had coffee. It seems those conversations were more meaningful to Mr. Blackwood than you can imagine, Ms. Sterling said. She then pulled a smaller sealed envelope from the folder. He also left this for you. A personal letter. He instructed that you read it before any documents were signed. Her hands shaking, Elara took the envelope. It was the same heavy, cream-colored paper. Her name was written on the front in a strong, elegant, slightly shaky hand. She broke the seal. My dearest Elara, if you are reading this, then my voyage has finally ended. I apologize for the deception of my name, but I hope you will understand. In my life, I built an empire of things of steel and code and concrete. But in my final year, I found myself impoverished in the ways that truly matter. I was surrounded by people who wanted something from me, who saw only a vault to be opened. Then I met you. You, who were in the midst of your own quiet storm, offered me the simple, priceless gift of your time and your thoughts. You never asked for anything. You didn't even know there was anything to ask for. You spoke to me of beauty, of history, of the soul of things. In your presence, I was not Alistair Blackwood, the magnate. I was just Ash, a man listening to a brilliant woman. You told me you would build a sanctuary. I believe you. This fortune has been a gilded cage for me for too long. In your hands, I hope it will become a key, a tool to protect the beautiful things you spoke of, to foster the talent the world overlooks, and to build a life of your own choosing, free from the shadows of your past. Do not let its weight crush you. Let it be the wind in your sails. Thank you, my dear friend, for the coffee and for the kindness. Yours, Alistair. Tears streamed down Elara's face, hot and silent. They weren't tears of joy for the money, but tears of grief for the friend she now realized she had lost, and of overwhelming gratitude for his staggering, incomprehensible faith in her. He had seen her when she felt invisible. He had valued her when the world and her own husband had declared her valueless. She finally understood her silence in the courtroom. It was a subconscious act of preservation, an instinct she hadn't fully understood at the time. If she had fought Julian, if she had argued over the scraps he was leaving her, her financial situation would have been a matter of intense legal scrutiny. If word of a potential inheritance had leaked, Julian and his lawyers would have descended like vultures trying to delay the divorce to lay claim to her future. Her silence had been a clean amputation. She had let him win the battle, severing their legal and financial ties completely, just days before the war was won by a force he couldn't have possibly imagined. She looked up at Eleanor Sterling, her eyes clear now despite the tears. A new resolve was hardening within her. The timid, broken woman who had walked into the courtroom was gone. "What do I need to do?" she asked, her voice steady and clear. A slow, genuine smile finally broke through Eleanor Sterling's professional facade. "First," she said, pushing a pen across the desk, "you sign here, Ms. Vance, and then we get to work." The announcement was not a headline. It was an earthquake. Sterling & Finch LLP, a firm known for its monastic silence, issued a terse 2-paragraph press release. It was a masterclass in understated bombshells. It announced the passing of their client, the reclusive Alistair Blackwood, and the execution of his final will and testament, which named one Ms. Elara Vance as his sole unconditional heir. The financial world went into a frenzy. Who was Elara Vance? The name was unknown. Journalists scrambled, digging into public records. Within hours they found it, a recent divorce filing in the Manhattan family court, Vance versus Croft. The details were salacious and, until now, utterly insignificant. A failed art gallery owner, a humiliating legal defeat, a woman stripped of her assets and denied alimony just over a week ago. The narrative flipped with dizzying speed. Forbes, the silent heiress. How a down-and-out divorcee inherited the Blackwood billions. The Wall Street Journal. Blackwood's surprise successor. Vance inheritance sends shockwaves through Consolidated. Vanity Fair. The ultimate revenge. Julian Croft divorced his wife days before she became a billionaire. Julian Croft was in a celebratory dinner with Tiffany at Per Se when his phone began to vibrate off the table. He ignored the first few calls, annoyed at the interruption. But then his phone, Tiffany's phone and the phones at the surrounding tables all began to light up. A low murmur swept through the restaurant. "Julian," Marcus Thorne's voice said, panicked and breathless when he finally answered. "Have you seen the news?" "I'm at dinner, Marcus." "What is it?" Julian snapped. "It's Elara. You need to turn on the TV or look at your phone. Now." Julian opened a news app. The first thing he saw was a picture of Elara. A candid shot of her leaving the courthouse, her expression serene and unreadable. Next to it was an old file photo of a man he vaguely recognized as the mythical Alistair Blackwood. The headlines swam before his eyes. He dropped his phone. It clattered onto his plate, scattering microgreens and truffle foam. "What is it, sweetie?" Tiffany asked, annoyed. "You've gone pale." Julian couldn't speak. The numbers, the headlines, the sheer impossibility of it all crashed down on him. $9.7 billion. He thought back to the courtroom. Her silence. Her infuriating placid calm. It hadn't been defeat. It had been control. She had known. She had to have known. She had sat there and let him publicly humiliate her, let him take everything, knowing she had a billion-dollar kingdom waiting for her. He hadn't won. He had been played. He had been made a cosmic world historical fool. A strangled sound escaped his lips, a mixture of a laugh and a sob. He began to shake, then erupted in a furious tire-chuyan. "No! No! It's not possible! She's nothing! She's a failed artist!" The entire restaurant was now staring. Tiffany, mortified, tried to quiet him. "Julian, stop! You're making a scene!" But Julian was beyond reason. He shoved his chair back, nearly knocking a waiter over, and stormed out of the restaurant, his mind a raging inferno of greed, fury, and utter soul-crushing regret. His first call to Elara went to a disconnected number. She had already changed it. He then called her old lawyer, David Brown. "What can I do for you, Mr. Croft?" David asked, a newfound confidence in his voice. "This inheritance, it's marital property. We were married when she met this man. I'm entitled to half of it," Julian screamed into the phone. David Brown laughed, a quiet, satisfied chuckle. "I don't think you understand how this works, Julian. First, the inheritance was legally conferred after the dissolution of your marriage was finalized by a judge's gavel. The timing is, as they say, impeccable. Second, inheritance is almost universally considered separate, not marital property. You don't have a leg to stand on. You made sure the break was clean. Well, now it is. Have a nice life." The line went dead. The fallout was swift and brutal. The board of Julian's private equity firm, spooked by the public humiliation and the sudden instability of their star partner, called an emergency meeting. Whispers started that Blackwood Consolidated, now under new unpredictable ownership, might pull its massive pension funds from their management. Julian was suddenly toxic. Tiffany, seeing her future of Aspen trips and designer handbags evaporate, and seeing the man she thought was a winner revealed as a colossal loser, packed her bags. She left a short, cold note on the marble countertop of the apartment he had won in the divorce. Julian was left alone in the vast, empty loft, a place that now felt like a monument to his own stupidity. He had fought tooth and nail for this apartment, for the paintings on the wall, for the last dregs of their shared assets. He had gloated over winning a few $1 million worth of property from Elara, and in doing so he had forfeited his claim to billions. It was a miscalculation of such epic proportions that it would haunt him for the rest of his days. While Julian's world imploded, Elara's was expanding at an exponential rate. The first week was a whirlwind of meetings in the 82nd floor office at Sterling Tower, which she now learned was referred to as the Keep. Bedfordshire. She was introduced to a small, fiercely loyal team that had managed Alistair's empire for decades. A silver-haired CFO who could explain quantum financial derivatives with the patience of a kindergarten teacher, a sharp-witted head of operations, and Eleanor Sterling, who was her constant guide, her Virgil in this new glittering inferno of wealth. They didn't treat her like an ignorant interloper. They treated her like a queen whose coronation had been long awaited. They explained that Alistair had been preparing them for this, telling them his successor would be unconventional, but would have a moral clarity the company desperately needed. The transformation began on the inside. The fear and self-doubt that Julian had so carefully cultivated in her for years began to wither under the light of this new responsibility. She found that the skills she had honed as a curator, a sharp eye for detail, deep research abilities, an understanding of long-term value over short-term trends, and the ability to see the story behind the object were directly applicable to running an empire. She wasn't a finance shark, but she understood value in a way Julian never could. The external transformation followed. Eleanor Sterling arranged for a private consultation with a stylist. Elara didn't want to become a caricature of a wealthy woman. She rejected the flashy brands and opted for understated, elegant pieces from designers like the Row and Brunello Cucinelli clothes that conveyed quiet confidence, not loud status. She cut her long hair into a chic, shoulder-length style that framed her face and highlighted the intelligence in her stormy eyes. When she looked in the mirror, she saw not Julian's discarded wife, but the woman Alistair Blackwood had seen all along. Her first major decision stunned the board of Blackwood Consolidated. One of the company's most profitable but controversial divisions was in private prisons. It was a legacy part of the business Alistair had regretted but had never untangled. In her first board meeting, Elara, with Eleanor at her side, announced her intention to divest completely from the division, redirecting the capital into a new foundation for arts and education. There were gasps. The CFO calmly presented figures showing the tens of millions in annual profit they would be sacrificing. There are some things whose value can't be measured in profit margins. Elara stated, her voice calm and firm. The Blackwood name will no longer be attached to the caging of human beings for profit. This is not negotiable. The board, faced with the unshakable resolve of their new 100% shareholder, had no choice but to comply. The news of the divestment made headlines again, this time casting Elara not as a lucky heiress but as a bold, ethical leader. One weekend, Eleanor drove her upstate to see the Blackwood estate named Graymore. It wasn't a gaudy mansion, but a sprawling, elegant stone house nestled among rolling hills and ancient trees overlooking a vast, shimmering lake. Inside it was a sanctuary of books and art. The legendary private collection was not displayed ostentatiously, but hung and placed with a curator's love, as if the pieces were part of a conversation with each other. She walked through the halls, running her hand along the spines of thousand-year-old books in the library. She stood before the secret Vermeer, a small, luminous painting of a woman reading a letter by a window, and felt a profound connection to Alistair. He had bought these things not for status, but because he truly loved them. In a small study overlooking the lake, she found his desk exactly as he had left it. On it was a single worn copy of the Odyssey in Greek. Tucked inside was a pressed flower, a fading violet. Elara knew then that she was home. This wasn't a cage. It was the sanctuary she had spoken of in the cafe. It was now hers to protect and to share. She decided this would be the headquarters for her new foundation, a place where artists and scholars could come for residencies free from the financial pressures of the world, a place to foster the small, beautiful things. 3 months after the will was read, Julian Croft finally managed to secure a meeting. He had to go through 3 layers of lawyers, and the meeting was not granted at Elara's home or office, but in a neutral, sterile conference room at Sterling and Finch. The man who walked in was a ghost. His custom suits were gone, replaced by a slightly too large department store blazer. He had lost weight, and his trademark confident swagger was replaced by a twitchy, desperate energy. His private equity firm had forced him out. His friends had abandoned him, and he was drowning in legal fees from a half-dozen lawsuits filed by investors who had followed him into ruin. Elara sat at the head of the long table, flanked by Eleanor Sterling. She was the image of composure and power. She no longer looked like the woman he had divorced. She looked like the woman who owned the building they were in. "Elara," he began, his voice raspy. I wanted to talk to you. Alone." "Ms. Sterling stays," Elara said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "What do you want, Julian?" He began a rambling, pathetic plea. He spoke of their shared history of the good times, conveniently forgetting the years of emotional abuse. He tried to claim that his business acumen had inspired her, that he was indirectly responsible for her good fortune. Finally, he got to the point. "I'm ruined, Elara," he said, his voice cracking. "Everything is gone. I'm asking you. No, I'm begging you. For a settlement, a small percentage, 1%, just enough to start over, for old time's sake." Elara listened without expression. When he was finished, a long silence filled the room. Julian looked at her expectantly, a flicker of hope in his hollow eyes. He still believed on some fundamental level that she was the same soft-hearted woman he could easily manipulate. "No," Elara said. The single word was not spoken with anger or hatred. It was spoken with the finality of a chapter closing. It was a simple statement of fact. "But why," he stammered, "after everything we had—" Elara finally looked at him, truly looked at him. She felt no desire for revenge, no satisfaction in his downfall. All she felt was a profound, weary pity for this small, grasping man. "You know, for years you told me my biggest weakness was that I was too sentimental," she said, her voice even and calm. "You told me I lived in a fantasy world of art and history, and that I didn't understand how the real world worked, how value was created and taken." She leaned forward slightly. "But you were wrong. My weakness wasn't sentimentality. It was you. And your biggest weakness, Julian, is that you can only see the price of things but never their value. You saw our marriage as a transaction. You saw our divorce as a hostile takeover. You see this inheritance as a stock price you missed out on." She stood up, the meeting clearly over. "Alistair Blackwood didn't leave me his money. He left me his trust. He valued my character when you told me I had none. He valued my passion when you called it a hobby. The money is just a tool. It's the byproduct of a life lived with integrity, something you will never understand." She walked towards the door, pausing with her hand on the handle. "You asked for 1% for old time's sake," she said, looking back at him one last time. "But the final verdict in our divorce, the one you celebrated so much, declared that our old times were worth exactly nothing. The court has already decided what you are owed by me. And I am a woman who respects the letter of the law." She walked out of the room without a backward glance, leaving Julian Croft alone at the vast, empty table, a billionaire in spirit, a beggar in reality, forever haunted by the fortune he threw away and the woman he never truly saw. Elara, meanwhile, stepped out into the bright afternoon sun, her future as wide and limitless as the sky above. The winter that followed was a season of quiet construction, not with brick and mortar, but with purpose. Elara chose to make the Graymore estate her home and the heart of her new operations. The vast book-lined library, once Alistair's solitary refuge, was now the nerve center of the newly established Blackwood Foundation. The world, having learned of her existence, now beat a path to her door. Sacks of mail arrived daily, request proposals and pleas from every corner of the globe. They were a testament to the raw, desperate hunger of the world, a scientist needing funding for climate research, a village in Peru seeking a clean water well, a musician who had lost her priceless cello in a fire. But mixed in with the genuine cries for help was the noise of opportunism. Letters from self-proclaimed inventors with perpetual motion machines, long-lost cousins with dubious genealogical charts, and investment gurus promising to double her fortune. Elara quickly learned that her greatest challenge was not the management of money but the stewardship of trust. Her past life had given her a painful but invaluable skill, the ability to discern the authentic from the performative. Julian's world had been built on the latter, and she had learned its language intimately. She sat by the grand fireplace one snowy afternoon, a stack of proposals on the antique table beside her, with Eleanor Sterling, who now served as the Foundation's chairwoman. "The capital appreciation on the tech portfolio is exceeding forecasts by 12%, Eleanor said, reviewing a spreadsheet on her tablet. "If we reinvest, we could add another $1 billion to the endowment within 3 years. Elara looked out the window, watching the heavy, silent snowflakes blanket the ancient oaks. Alistair didn't spend his last year finding an heir just so she could get richer, Eleanor. He wanted me to build sanctuaries. A noble goal, Eleanor conceded, her tone practical. But a sanctuary needs strong walls. The endowment provides that. I know, Elara said, turning back to her. But it's time to open the gates, even if just a little. I want to start the Blackwood Fellows program, here at Graymore. The idea was simple but radical. Each year they would select a small number of brilliant but struggling creators, artists, writers, composers, thinkers, and give them a year's residency at the estate. They would be housed in the beautifully renovated guest houses, given a private studio space, and most importantly, a generous stipend that would free them from all financial worry. The only condition was that there were no conditions. No required gallery show at the end, no demand for a finished manuscript, no expectation of a commercial product. The goal was to give them the one thing a creator needs most and is rarely afforded: absolute, untethered freedom. Eleanor, ever the pragmatist, raised an eyebrow. No deliverables. The board may call that inefficient. Let them, Elara replied with a small smile. Julian taught me everything I need to know about efficiency. It often leads to a beautifully organized life with no soul. This isn't an investment in a product, it's an investment in a person. The first Blackwood Fellow was a young painter from the Bronx named Sophia Reyes. Elara had discovered her work at a small, struggling gallery in Bushwick. Sophia's canvases were enormous, chaotic, and breathtakingly alive. She painted with a raw, visceral energy, depicting scenes of urban life with the emotional weight of classical history paintings. Elara saw in her a fire and a talent that the world was close to extinguishing. The gallery owner told her that Sophia worked 2 bartending jobs to afford her tiny studio and often had to choose between buying paint and buying food. Instead of sending a formal letter, Elara drove to the city and went to the address of the studio herself. It was a cramped cold-water loft above a tire shop. The smell of turpentine and linseed oil was overpowering. Sophia, a young woman with paint-smeared hands and wary, intelligent eyes, was openly suspicious when Elara introduced herself. I know who you are, Sophia said, crossing her arms. She didn't seem impressed. I read the papers. So what's this? The billionaire heiress is slumming it for a day. Want to buy a painting to make you feel good? Elara didn't flinch at the cynicism. She recognized it as armor. Actually, she said, her gaze drifting to a massive unfinished canvas depicting a crowded subway car, the faces a mixture of exhaustion and defiance. I'm here because I believe a talent like yours deserves to be loud and the world is forcing you to whisper. I'm here to offer you a megaphone. She explained the fellowship. Sophia listened, her skeptical expression slowly melting into one of utter disbelief. A year with a stipend, and I don't owe you anything at the end. Sophia asked, her voice laced with suspicion. What's the catch? Do I have to have dinner with your rich friends and perform like a trained monkey? No, Elara said softly. There's no catch. The only thing I ask is that you honor your gift, that you work without fear for 1 year. Why? Sophia asked, the single word hanging in the air between them. Why me? Elara thought of Mr. Ashe, of their quiet conversations in the cafe. She thought of how he had given her a priceless gift without ever asking for anything in return. Because a very wise man once gave me a sanctuary when I needed it most, Elara said. He didn't ask me to pay him back. He asked me to build my own. This is me laying the first stone. A few weeks later, Sophia Reyes moved into a sun-drenched studio in a converted barn on the Graymore estate, with a view of the frozen lake. Elara watched her from the library window on her first day. She saw the young painter stand before a huge blank canvas, her entire body thrumming with a kind of nervous, joyful energy. For the first time in years, Sophia was not thinking about her rent, her bills, or her next shift. She was thinking only of the art. In that moment, watching a stranger's dream ignite, Elara felt a sense of profound, quiet satisfaction that no stock market gain or legal victory could ever provide. The billion-dollar fortune was not a prize she had won. It was a responsibility she had inherited, and her life's work, she now understood, was not to be the heiress to a vast fortune, but to be the architect of its soul. Elara Vance's story is a powerful reminder that the world often mistakes quietness for weakness and silence for defeat. She proved that integrity is a currency more valuable than any stock, and that kindness can yield dividends beyond any billionaire's wildest dreams. Her journey from a silent courtroom to the head of a global empire wasn't about the money. It was about reclaiming a voice she was told wasn't worth hearing. It shows us that sometimes the most strategic move is to let your enemies defeat themselves while you wait patiently for the life you truly deserve. What did you think of Elara's calculated silence? Was it the ultimate power move or an incredible risk? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story of poetic justice and quiet strength as compelling as I did, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own worth, and make sure you subscribe to the channel for more incredible true life stories. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Thanks for listening.